The hum of the supermarket was steady, the kind of background noise people barely noticed. Scanners beeping, carts rattling, murmured conversations that blended into a blur. But for Jack Carter, that hum felt like a storm pressing in. He stood at the checkout counter, every muscle in his body tight, as he laid down the last of his coins. 3 quarters, a nickel, and a few pennies so worn they had lost their shine. He counted them once, then again, as if by some miracle they might multiply. His hand hovered in the air, holding the tiny pile of change as though it carried the weight of his whole life. Behind him, his daughter Emma shifted restlessly in the cart. She was only a toddler, cheeks sticky with the remnants of a cracker, hair tangled from the long day. When her small cry broke the air, it wasn't loud, but it was sharp. It was the kind of cry that made strangers turn away, uncomfortable. The kind of cry that reminded Jack how little he had to give. He forced a smile toward the cashier, though it barely touched his tired eyes. "Can you take the wipes off?" he asked quickly, hoping the numbers on the screen might shift in his favor. "You didn't buy wipes," the cashier replied flatly, her attention still fixed on the register. Jack's face fell. Right. Of course. He hadn't bought them. He couldn't. All he had placed on the conveyor belt was a single pack of off-brand diapers, size 3. That was it. That was all his last dollars could reach for. He dug deeper into his pockets, fingers brushing lint, folded receipts, and finally 2 more dimes and a bent penny. He laid them down carefully, praying it would be enough. But it wasn't. He was, still short. Someone behind him muttered, low but sharp enough to cut through the air. "Shouldn't have kids if you can't afford them." The words burned, but Jack didn't turn around. He bent down instead, crouching next to the cart if to fix Emma's blanket. His hands searched his coat for something, anything he might have missed. His fingertips brushed against the cool edge of a quarter buried deep inside the seam. Hope flickered, but as he pulled it free, a penny slipped from his hand, clattering, onto the floor and rolling under the cart. Jack lowered himself to his knees, the tile cold against his bones. His body ached from long days of work, long nights of worry. He reached for the penny, stretching his fingers, and above him Emma leaned over, tiny hands reaching toward his head. "Almost, baby," he whispered with a fragile smile. "Almost." The sigh of someone impatient broke the moment, followed by the shuffle of shoes as the line behind him grew restless. Jack stood, clutching the rescued penny like treasure, and set it on the counter. Every cent mattered. The cashier raised her brow. "Still 87 short." Jack's throat tightened. His lips parted, ready to say it. To admit defeat. To tell her to put the diapers back. His pride wrestled with his reality, and reality was winning. Then, before he could speak, a voice rose behind him. Calm, clear, firm. "I'll take them all." "You're short by 87. Jack turned, startled. The woman behind him stood tall, poised, a quiet strength in her posture. She was in her early 30s, blonde curls falling over her shoulder, dressed in a cream-colored coat that looked out of place under the harsh supermarket lights. In her basket sat baby food, a stuffed giraffe, and shampoo. Items carefully chosen, nothing flashy, nothing careless. She stepped forward, setting her basket gently on the belt. "I'll cover his items," she told the cashier, her voice soft, but unwavering. Then she looked at Jack. "Please." Jack's mouth opened, but no words formed. He blinked, stunned. Emma's cries had faded into hiccups, her wide eyes staring curiously at the stranger. The woman smiled at her warmly, then turned back. "And add wipes," she said. "And a few fruit pouches." The cashier hesitated, glanced at Jack, then began scanning again. Jack felt his chest constrict. This time it wasn't from shame or panic, but from something harder to define. Gratitude, sharp and heavy. He tried to speak, but his voice faltered. I She lifted a hand gently, not to silence him, but to ease the weight from his shoulders. "You don't owe me anything," she said softly. "She deserves to go home clean and full. That's all." Her eyes met his, steady and kind. They weren't filled with pity, nor with superiority. There was something else there, understanding, a quiet recognition, the kind that only came from living through it yourself. Jack swallowed, the fight inside him softening for just a moment. He gave the smallest nod. Respect. Nothing more, nothing less. Around them, the line had fallen silent. Maybe some still judged him. Maybe some felt guilty. But in that instant, none of it mattered. What mattered was the simple truth. A stranger had stepped in. Not for attention, not for reward. Simply because she saw someone who needed help. What Jack didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that this woman wasn't a stranger at all. Not really. Their paths had crossed once before, and soon they would cross again. If you believe the world needs more moments like this, if you believe compassion still matters, tap that hype button. It helps us share stories like this with hearts that need them. Jack stared at the receipt as it was handed to her. He didn't move. The shopping bag she passed to him felt heavier than it should have. Diapers, wipes, fruit pouches, and a small plush giraffe now nestled beside Emma's leg. He could feel the weight of every item, not in his arms, but in his chest. He turned to her, his voice cracked. "I'm not a beggar." The words weren't sharp. They weren't angry. They were wounded, fragile, spoken by a man who had carried too much for too long. The woman didn't flinch. She held his gaze with a quiet strength. "I know," she said softly. "I never thought you were." Jack looked away for a moment, steadying his breath. He wasn't used to kindness without strings. It always came with a price. At least, that's what life had taught him. But then she spoke again, her tone gentler still. "When I was a baby," she said, "there were days I went without diapers too. I remember the cold, the smell, the way people looked at my mother when she asked for help. So no, I'm not helping you out of pity. I know the feeling." Jack's eyes flicked back to hers, surprised. Something in his expression softened, just slightly. Emma giggled suddenly, distracted by the giraffe toy sticking from the bag. Her little hands reached for it, and Jack steadied the cart, his movements gentler now. He looked back at the woman. His defenses had thinned. A nod passed between them, almost invisible. Not surrender, not weakness, just gratitude. "Thank you," he murmured. She smiled, not wide, not showy, just enough to let him know he had been heard. Jack turned the cart and headed toward the sliding doors. Cool evening air met him, brushing against his face as he pushed Emma slowly across the lot. The bag rustled in his hand, every step echoing with the weight of what had just happened. Beside the exit, clearance bins lined the wall. Jack stopped. He reached into the bag, pulling out a red fruit pouch. Strawberry banana. Expensive. More than they needed. He stared at it, then walked back in and placed it gently on the impulse shelf. He kept the diapers, the wipes, the giraffe Emma already loved. But the pouch, he left behind. His rule was simple: take only what you cannot give back. In the parking lot, he strapped Emma into the battered car seat of his old pickup truck. The interior smelled of leather and motor oil, worn by years of use. Emma clutched the giraffe proudly, babbling nonsense to herself. Jack slid into the driver's seat and sat for a long moment. He hadn't expected anyone to help him tonight. Certainly not her. He glanced at the rearview mirror. Emma waved the giraffe, her smile wide and innocent. Jack breathed deeply. "I'm not a beggar," he whispered. And for the first time in years, he believed it. Far above the city, the 32nd floor of Heart Baby headquarters gleamed with glass and steel. The view stretched for miles, a skyline Evelyn Hart herself had helped shape. Yet her office was quiet, too quiet. She stood by the window, fingers toying with a small silver locket, its chain frayed, the metal dulled with age. She had held it like this 1,000 times, a habit born from memory and loss. She opened it slowly. Inside, etched in shaky letters, J. Carter. A knock broke her silence. "Come in," she said softly without turning. Margaret, her loyal assistant, entered with a stack of reports. "Board documents for Midtown," she explained. Then she paused, noticing the locket. "You're holding it again." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Do I always do that?" "Only when you're thinking about the fire." Evelyn let the silence linger before she spoke. Her eyes stayed on the glass, her reflection, pale against the skyline. "I dreamed about it again last night," she said quietly. "I was 7. The orphanage was falling apart. They said it was an accident, but I never believed them. Most of the kids escaped. I didn't. I was upstairs, smoke everywhere. I crawled. Under the bed. Couldn't breathe. I thought it was over. Then someone kicked the door in." She turned from the window, holding the locket between her fingers. Was a boy, 10, maybe, dirty jacket. He threw it over me, picked me up, and said, "I got you. You're safe now." Then he carried me out. Evelyn paused. They never found him. No name, no file. Firefighters guessed he was a street kid. All I had was this. She held up the locket, which must have come off his neck when he carried me. Margaret nodded. "You've been searching ever since. Not openly, but in my heart." I think I never stopped. That afternoon, Evelyn visited Hope and Hands, a non-profit supported by Heartbee. It offered supplies and support for single parents. She came often, quietly, no press. As she passed the distribution desk, she stopped. A man stood there, a toddler in his arm, signing a clipboard. Grease stained his jeans. His boots were worn, his posture strong, steady. The girl on his hip giggled and clapped. Evelyn's heart caught. The baby from the supermarket. The man turned. It was him. They locked eyes, familiarity passing between them. Evelyn stepped closer. "I didn't expect to see you again." Jack nodded. "Neither did I. But thank you. Emma's doing better." "She's beautiful," Evelyn said, smiling. "We're just here for diapers. They said they restock Thursdays." "I know," she said. "I fund this place." Jack looked surprised. Then he nodded. She hesitated. "Do you still work on cars?" Jack tilted his head. "Yeah, side gigs when I can, mostly cash work." "We have vans at heart, baby," she said. "Always breaking down. If you're interested, I could set up a contract. Flexible hours, fair pay." Jack's eyes narrowed slightly. "Because I'm broke." "No," she said softly. "Because you're capable and honest, and I think you deserve a break." He held her gaze, then shifted Emma to his other arm. "I'll think about it. That's all I ask." Jack turned and walked out. Evelyn remained where she was, her pulse louder than it should have been. She hadn't asked his full name, not yet. But something about him, his voice, his presence, stayed with her, like smoke. She looked down at the locket, still warm in her hand. "J. Carter," she whispered, and for the first time in years, she wondered if the boy from the fire had just come back. The garage behind Heartbaby's main warehouse was nothing fancy, just a wide oil-stained space with flickering lights, battered tool chests, and delivery vans, in various stages of decay. But to Jack Carter, it felt like purpose. For the first time in a long while, he had a routine. He arrived early each morning, Emma, nestled in a second-hand baby carrier on his chest. She slept soundly against him as he worked, soothed by the rhythm of wrenches and ratchets. Jack did the best he could with limited parts. He tracked every bolt, every belt, every fix. He never padded his hours, never lied about repairs. When a part was still usable, he said so. People noticed, especially Evelyn. One Thursday she walked into the garage unannounced. The scent of motor oil hit her instantly, but she smiled through it. Her heels clicked softly on the concrete as she approached the far end of the bay. Jack was crouched beside a van, sleeves rolled, grease on his arms. Emma sat nearby in the hollow of an old tire, giggling, waving a piece of brake line like a magic wand. "Is that safe?" Evelyn asked, smiling. Jack looked up, surprised. "No fluid." "She's fine." Just he paused, testing her lunar landing gear. Evelyn stepped closer. Emma was surrounded by makeshift controls, two small wheels up front like a cockpit, and tubing for a pretend horn. "She said she wanted to go to the moon," Jack added. "This is her training module." Evelyn laughed, genuine and unguarded. Jack felt something stir. It had been a long time since he heard laughter like that. Soft, honest from someone who meant it. "Hazel Hewitt," she said. "Happier now than ever before." "Happier simply to be wealthy," Evelyn said, looking at an "I try," Jack answered. A week later, Evelyn returned. This time there was no laughter. Jack was pacing outside the garage. Emma limp in his arms. Her cheeks were flushed, forehead damp. "She's burning up," he said, panicked. "Was going to take her to the clinic, but my truck won't start." Without hesitation, Evelyn unlocked her car. "Get in." Jack climbed in without argument. The ride was quiet, except for Emma's occasional whimpers. Evelyn drove fast, but careful. Jack sat stiffly, hands clenched. At the clinic, Evelyn handled the paperwork. Jack never left Emma's side. "A simple fever," the doctor said. "Nothing serious, but enough to shake any parent." Outside on a bench, they waited for the prescription. Jack cleared his throat. "Thank you." His voice was quiet, almost cracked. It was not a casual thank you. It came from somewhere deeper. Evelyn didn't smile this time. She only nodded. "You're welcome." Emma rested against Jack's chests, eyes already drifting closed. "You're a good father?" Evelyn said softly. Jack looked down. "I'm trying. That's all it takes." And In the weeks that followed, Evelyn began visiting the garage more often. She always had a reason. New parts, updated delivery schedules, but she lingered longer than needed. Jack started saving Emma's best moments to share with her. How she danced, to the hum of the air compressor or her obsession with paper towels. And Evelyn found herself laughing more, smiling longer, coming back. Something was growing. Not romance, not yet, but something warm, something real. Jack, who once kept the world at arm's length, now listened for her footsteps. Evelyn, who had trusted no one but herself, began waiting for the moment he looked up, and said, "Morning." In that grease-scented space among engines and giggles, between sick days and soft thank yous, a friendship began. Not because they were broken, but because in each other's eyes they finally felt seen. It started with a photo, a grainy snapshot taken on someone's phone, posted to social media with a caption that was more poison than praise. It showed Evelyn Hart, elegant, composed, perfectly dressed, kneeling beside a rusty pickup truck, holding a baby girl wrapped in a faded pink blanket. The moment had been innocent, private, a fleeting second outside the family center when Jack was fumbling with the car seat straps, and Evelyn had scooped Emma into her arms with practiced ease. She had smiled down at the little girl. Emma had laughed. Someone had taken the shot. By morning, the image was everywhere. Billionaire CEO cradles poor man's baby. Is it real compassion or a PR stunt? Rich woman, poor baby. Is Evelyn Hart playing savior for the cameras? CEO uses struggling single dad to rebrand humanity into her company. The options were headlines screamed. Opinions poured in. Some praised her, most did not. Talk shows speculated. Internet trolls tore her apart. Even investors started asking questions. Evelyn read it all insolence. She sat at her desk in the high-rise office, scrolling through an endless feed of comments, her face unreadable. Her phone buzzed every 30 seconds. Margaret trying to get through. Reporters asking for statements. Crisis managers offering spin. She answered none of them. Instead, she closed the laptop, stood up, and walked to the window. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her, polished, successful, poised. But inside, she felt like the little girl in the orphanage again, invisible and alone. That afternoon, Jack was under the hood of a van when his phone buzzed on the workbench. He wiped his hands on a rag and glanced at the screen. A news alert. He opened the article, then another, and another. The words hit like punches. Evelyn's name smeared across headlines. Emma's photo online for the world to see. He stood there frozen. Fury boiled up in his chest. Not because they used his image, but because they had turned her into a villain. Without thinking, he dropped the wrench, wiped his hands, and headed straight for the main building. The receptionist. At Heartbaby, Abby hesitated when Jack stormed into the lobby. He did not have an appointment. He did not need one. "I need to see Evelyn," he said. "Now." His voice left no room for argument. 2 minutes later, the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Evelyn looked up as Jack walked in. She had not expected anyone. Beast of all him. Her eyes were tired, makeup faintly smudged at the corners like she had rubbed away a few tears and pretended she hadn't. Jack stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. "You don't have to take this alone," he said without preamble. She blinked. "It's fine." "No, it's not," he snapped, then caught himself. "They are dragging your name through the mud using me. Using Emma." Evelyn turned her gaze away. "It will pass." Jack shook his head. "That doesn't mean you have to let it." Silence stretched between them, and then Evelyn exhaled slow and shaky. "I'm not crying because of the headlines," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. Jack stepped closer. She continued, eyes locked on the floor. "I'm crying because for once someone spoke up for me." "You did." He said nothing. Evelyn looked up, her eyes shimmered. "When I was a kid," she said, "I used to dream that someone would stand between me and the world just once. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to." Jack swallowed hard. "You just did that?" she finished, her voice cracking. And just like that, the walls she had built around herself began to crumble. Jack nodded slowly. "I didn't do anything special." "You showed up," she said. "That's more than most ever did." For a moment they just stood there, two people who had grown used to carrying their own weight, finally realizing they did not have to. Not always. Outside the window the city buzzed with noise and opinions, and the constant churn of scandal, but in that office it was quiet, real, and for the first time in a long time, Evelyn Hart let herself feel safe. The envelope arrived in the morning mail, slipped between an overdue utility bill and a flyer for discount tires. Jack almost tossed it aside, but the logo in the top corner caught his eye. Hartp. He tore it open with a calloused thumb, brow furrowed. Inside was a formal letter printed on thick cream paper. It was direct and professional, signed in blue ink. "We would like to offer you the position of Logistics Operations Manager. Full-time benefits included. Start date flexible." Jack sat on the couch, the letter resting in his lap like something too heavy to lift again. He stared at it for a long time. Logistics manager, not a mechanic, not a temp worker fixing vans between diaper runs. A manager, a leader. He looked across the room at Emma, curled up on the floor with her toy giraffe and a blanket that still smelled faintly of Evelyn's perfume. He wanted to say yes, but the old voice crept in. "You are not qualified. You are not that guy. They will find out who you really are." He folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope. That evening he stayed late at the garage, turned off the lights, locked up, drove home slowly, windshield wipers clicking back and forth across light drizzle. The sky had turned an unforgiving gray. Rain fell in scattered sheets, soaking the cracked sidewalk and the faded welcome mat in front of his small apartment. He was feeding Emma when the knock came. Not loud, just steady. He opened the door and saw her standing there, Evelyn. Her blonde curls were damp from the rain, her coat clinging to her shoulders. In her arms was a thick folded blanket, a deep navy blue lined with soft white fleece. She held it out. "For Emma," she said. Jack stepped aside wordlessly and let her in. The apartment was modest, clean. A lamp in the corner glowed softly, casting a warm light across the room. Evelyn bent down and gently draped the blanket over Emma, who reached for it immediately and smiled. Jack stood by the kitchen counter, unsure what to say. "I got your letter," he said finally. "I figured you did. You didn't have to come." "I know," she said. He hesitated, then added, "I am not sure I can do that job." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked over slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a wounded animal. She reached for his hand. "Jack," she said quietly, "do not walk away from someone who believes in you." His throat tightened. "I've made mistakes," he said. "So have I. I dropped out of college, never finished a thing I started. You raised a child alone. You fix what's broken. You show up. That counts for more." Jack blinked hard, fighting thesting in his eyes. "I am not used to this," he said. "Someone seeing more than what's on the surface." "I see you," Evelyn said. She squeezed his hand, and something broke open inside him. He lowered his head and let the tears fall, silent, unshaken, as if they had been waiting for years. Evelyn stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, steady and firm. She did not let go. Neither did he. For the first time in a long time, Jack Carter let someone hold the weight with him. And when the rain finally stopped and Evelyn turned to go, he said two words that changed everything. "I'm in." The city shimmered below like a sea of glass and light. But Evelyn Hart was not looking at it. She sat alone on the rooftop terrace of Hart Baby headquarters, the wind teasing loose strands of her curls. Her coat hung forgotten behind her chair. In her hand was a small silver locket, worn, scratched, dulled with time. She opened it gently. Inside, etched in faint, clumsy letters, J. Carter. She had carried it for over 20 years. The memory was no longer a blur. The fire, the smoke, the boy's voice. She had spent her life wondering if she would ever find him. If she would ever say, "Thank you." That night she sent Jack a message. "Can you meet me on the rooftop tomorrow morning? There's something I need to ask." His reply came quickly. "Sure, I'll be there." The next morning Jack stepped onto the rooftop just after sunrise. A chill hung in the air. His jacket was zipped halfway, grease still smudged faintly on his sleeves. Evelyn was already there, arms loosely crossed. She looked at him for a long moment, then spoke. "Jack, what's your full name?" He blinked. "Jack Carter." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the locket, holding it in her open palm. "Does this look familiar?" Jack stepped closer. The moment he saw it, his expression shifted. He picked it up carefully, opened it. "I haven't seen this in over 20 years, he murmured. "This was mine. My mom gave it to me when I was little." He looked up, confused. "Where did you get it?" Evelyn's voice was soft. "There was a fire at my orphanage. I was trapped upstairs, couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die." Jack's eyes widened. "I remember that fire," he said slowly. "I lived nearby, saw the smoke. I ran over. Someone said there was still a girl inside. Hate trailed off. You? Evelyn nodded, eyes shining. You kicked the door in. You were just a boy. You threw your jacket over me and said, Jack whispered, I got you. You're safe now. Her breath caught. You were him. I never knew who you were, Jack said, still stunned. Just that you were scared and I had to get you out. And this, Evelyn pointed to the locket, was still in my hand when they carried me out. Jack reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded, yellowed scrap of paper. He handed it to her. She opened it. A rough evacuation list scribbled at the bottom in a child's hand. Blonde girl, room 14. Saved. I kept that ever since, Jack said. I always wondered what happened to you. Evelyn couldn't speak. Her throat was tight with emotion. She stepped closer and gently leaned her head against his shoulder. Jack froze for a moment, then slowly took her hand in his. They stood there together, wrapped in silence, surrounded by wind and sky. Below them, the city kept moving. But up on that rooftop, time had paused. You saved my life, Evelyn whispered. And you gave mine back, Jack replied. She smiled faintly. Maybe we belonged to each other all along, just didn't know how to find our way back. Jack didn't answer. He only held her hand tighter. And as the morning sun broke over the skyline, something lost long ago was finally found. 1 year later, the garage was gone, replaced by a glass-walled office on the 3rd floor of Heart Baby's operations wing. But Jack still showed up early every morning. Coffee in one hand, toolbox in the other, just in case. His new title, Director of Logistics and Community Outreach. But most people still just called him Jack. In the past year, life had shifted. He had gone from sleeping on a worn-out couch to helping build programs that changed lives. His proudest project, a workshop. At the back of Heart Baby's headquarters, where the loading docks once stood, now stood a space he had helped design. Second Chance, a skills program for single parents. Free mechanical training, child care on site, hot meals, job placement help. All the things he had once needed now offered freely to others. Evelyn had trusted him from day one. You know what it should be, she told him. Build it your way. So he did. Twice a week, Jack taught young moms and dads how to fix cars, hold a wrench, and believe in themselves. They came in uncertain. They left with oil-streaked hands and lifted chins. He saw himself in every one of them. That morning, Evelyn stood with Emma at the curb of her preschool. The little girl, now 2, was taller, chattier, and still inseparable from her stuffed giraffe. Jack approached just as Evelyn kissed Emma's forehead. Ready? He asked. Evelyn smiled and took his hand. Always. They walked back to the car. No rush, no stress, just steady love. That afternoon, Evelyn stood behind a podium at Heart Baby's new community wing. A few press, a few staff, cameras clicked softly. Today is more than the launch of a charity, she began. It's a promise that no parent should feel alone and no child should go without. She turned slightly, gesturing toward Jack. I'm proud to introduce the new CEO of the Second Chance Foundation, she said. A man who knows what it means to fall and rise again. Jack Carter. Applause rose gently. Jack stepped forward. No tie, just a crisp shirt and quiet strength. He looked over the crowd, then began. I used to think survival was enough, he said. Just getting through the day. But someone showed me life is about more than that. It's about being seen. About having someone believe in you when you don't believe in yourself. He glanced at Evelyn. She didn't save me. She stood beside me. That's what Second Chance is about. Standing beside someone until they can stand on their own. The applause this time came with misty eyes. Later that evening, when the lights and speeches were over, Jack, Evelyn, and Emma sat together on a bench in the park. The sunset bathed the trees in gold. The breeze smelled like cut grass. Emma slept. in Jack's arms, wrapped in the same navy moon blanket Evelyn had once brought them on a stormy night. Evelyn rested her head on Jack's shoulder, one hand on Emma's back, the other curled into his. They said nothing. They did not need to. This was not a fairy tale, not a perfect ending. It was something better. It was real. A father who almost gave up. A woman who never stopped searching. A little girl who brought them together. And a second chance that made them whole. If this story moved you, reminded you of the quiet strength in kindness and second chances, don't let it be the last. Subscribe to soul-stirring stories for more true to the art tales that heal, inspire, and stay with you long after the screen fades. Because somewhere out there, someone just like Jack, Evelyn, or little Emma is still waiting for hope, for love, for a moment that changes everything. Let's keep sharing stories that matter, stories that stir the soul, stories that bring us closer.